are now 1 week away from our big holiday show, and we encourage you to tune in. We're gonna try to make it as fun and exciting as it's been in previous years. Lots of good stuff will be available. Giveaways, lots of giveaways coming next week for the big holiday show, and then we're gonna have at least a 2-week hiatus while we go through the holidays and cram for our awards voting. How are you feeling about awards voting this year? You feel like we're
not a lot of obvious stuff out there. There's some obvious performances out there.
Yeah.
I'm still loving Judy.
Renee Zellweger.
Renee, I'm loving that performance still. Although that film is not on my list.
Yeah.
So there's 4 or 5 performances out there. Marriage Story seems to be something everybody's talking about.
Yeah.
It's a film that I appreciated more than I liked.
I loved your film week thing on it. Because see, I have the same problem with him and his movies. I just feel like this is a guy who grew up in a certain milieu in New York where he should really be very appreciative. Like when he and Woody Allen have a similar background to some degree. But his is much more privileged. Yeah. Woody Allen was more middle class.
Yeah, it was that joke Woody makes about growing up under the
under
the bridge in Coney Island, you know.
But when Woody looks at the whole Upper East Side, Upper West Side world, it's with a certain eye of, I don't want to say cynicism, but he understands how silly it all is.
Oh yeah, he always
silly
has
that world is.
A scant in Crimes and Misdemeanors.
Yeah,
he makes that character in the documentarian.
Yeah,
he's definitively not a part of it. He married into it.
Yeah.
Because people keep saying that.
But I feel
no, Noah's not doing the same thing Woody's doing.
But I feel like Noah Baumbach takes it all way too seriously. Yeah. Like he really, and these are people who, I get it, they have problems. I'm not going to minimize. I'm not going to minimize the problems, but I just don't think they deserve to be magnified quite the way that he magnifies them.
With a sort of obliviousness to the fact that you do know you live in a $5 million brownstone on the Upper East. You know that, right? I get it. You're getting divorced. That's a bummer. Nobody wants to get. It's a bummer.
Squid and the Whale drove me crazy.
I mean, pull yourself together for God's sake. Kicking and screaming. You know that very first one. It started there with me. Yeah. I mean. You all just graduated. The kids about these kids are graduating from Vassar, with these degrees, and you're whining. Shut up.
I know. Crazy stuff. Well, we're gonna dive right into it. We have some library titles, catalog stuff from last week left over. We got foreign, we got LGBT, we got cult, we got anime. We're gonna try to get through as much of it as we can. Anything that we don't, we're gonna push off till after our holiday show. So let's see what we can plow through. Anime bonanza this week. It is just it is bonkers, and some of these things will definitely show up on the holiday show again in all likelihood. But for now, we've got. Let me roll through some of this. So Funimation, we got the Funimation stuff first. Angels of Death, the complete series. Really a beautifully animated show. Interesting kind of a mystery. It's a memory mystery about this woman who wakes up in a basement and has no idea who she is, where she came from, and this is where it becomes an adventure as she tries to escape and suddenly falls into this remarkable adventure. It's very, very interesting, very well written, and one of the more sort of accessible anime things that I've seen in a while that doesn't require you to have a whole universal backstory on it. A Certain Magical Index, Season 3, Part 1, continues this story. If you haven't caught on to it by now, it's probably likely way too late. This is starts with the feud between Academy City and the Roman Orthodox Church, on and on and on, and it's look, Certain Magical Index, it's too deep, but if you're already deep into it, Season 3, this is the beginning of Season 3. First 2 seasons are really kind of a warm-up. This actually gets very, very interesting. Also, Dragon Ball Super, Part 8. If you haven't caught up to this, Part 8 is not going to help you. If you're already all the way through the first 7, you'll probably get into this. This is, getting ready for the Tournament of Power. And it is what it is. It's Dragon Ball. It's not really my thing. Double Decker. Doug and Kirill, the complete series, plus the OVA stuff. This is actually very, very interesting and telling. The character of Kirill is kind of an anti-drug crusader of sorts. There's this drug called Anthem, and this team called 7-0 has to stop people from using it. It's kind of it's a bit of an unusual story in that it seems to be speaking to something in Japanese society at the same time that it's telling kind of an unusual spy/superhero story. It's unusual. It's not terribly accessible, but I found it sociologically a little bit interesting. Black Clover, Season 2, Part 1, continues the Black Clover Odyssey, whatever you want to call it. Of all these sort of Harry Pottery spin-offs, Harry Pottery derivations, I find this to be one of the more interesting ones. And it's worth checking out. If you like Season 1, you'll definitely probably enjoy Season 2. Goblin Slayer is great. Goblin Slayer was surprisingly good to me. I love the world that it creates, the Adventurers Guild, and the way that there are all these hierarchies of creatures, and that goblins are really, really kind of low on it. I think that's all really, really interesting, and it's very creative. It goes in directions that you don't exactly expect. So Season 1 of Goblin Slayer, really cool animation, very interesting narrative, worth checking out. I found that to be very, very interesting. Also in its part 2 is Tokyo Ghoul. Not as interesting as part 1. I didn't pay a ton of attention to part 1, but this does come with a great deal of stuff. There's an 80-page art book here, which is actually probably more interesting than the season itself. I mean, it's the usual thing. They're always looking for weird ways of creating new superhero teams in anime. And this one is about humans who have these kinds of supernatural powers, ghoul powers, and they call themselves the Kink Squad, Quinx. It's basically kind of Ghostbusters meets the Avengers. It's okay. Magical Girl Raising Project, the complete series. What a weird title that is. Magical Girl Raising Project. It is for those who are looking for kind of superhero magical power things that have that are very girl centered. This is one of the few. Lots of girl centered stuff in anime, but very few where they are kind of in the same heroic position. And this one's good. There are 15 girls in total here, and they all have to sort of compete with each other to keep their powers. And it's it kind of has a touch of that Harry Potter thing, but otherwise I really, really enjoyed it. I thought it was very solid. A few others here. Ace Attorney Season 2 Part 1. This is, courtroom drama in anime is a little bit odd, but there it is. And this is Season 2. It's kind of the same as Season 1. We'll see where it goes, but it's pretty much the same. How Not to Summon a Demon Lord, the complete series. That's a funny title. How Not to Summon a Demon Lord. This is kind of I don't know. It's sort of like inverted. It inverts a lot of these anime motifs. It has a video game background to it. I didn't find it very interesting or accessible. Don't really know what it's referencing, and maybe that's the problem. We also have That Time I Got Reincarnated as a Slime, Season 1, Part 1. Let me read that again, Tim. That Time I Got Reincarnated as a Slime. Not reincarnated as slime, but reincarnated as a slime.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's the thing. So this is about this guy who is reincarnated as a slime. And what is a slime? Well, it's a very uninteresting thing. It's a kind of a monster, but as a result, he is able to. I mean, really, it's like it's not even very interesting to animate. It's just kind of this amorphous blob of a thing. Anyway, it's supposed to be a comedy, I think, from the title and from the way that this has sort of a theme about outcasts and how you can if you become an outcast, if you're reincarnated as a slime, that you may still have some kind of a Joseph Campbell-y mission or something. I don't know if it's that interesting. It's okay. Really cool steelbook for Yu Yu Hakusho Season 1. This is a it's an afterlife odyssey about a detective who works in the afterlife, trying to track down problematic characters, humans, monsters, and whatnot. Interesting idea. I'm not sure it's fully fleshed out, but it's a really cool steelbook, and might make for a really, really great gift. The last one from Funimation is Senran Kagura Shinobi Master. And this is all about, Ninja Academy and, the women learning how to be master ninjas. And it's fun and it's cute. It's a little bit shallow, but otherwise decently animated.
Groovy.
And last few anime, not from Funimation, from Made in Japan, we have Yumero Patissiere, the complete collection. Yumero Patissiere. There's a weird French obsession here. These are two separate series. This is the complete collection, two different series, 63 episodes. There's a really weird obsession here with French pastries. This is effectively about a little girl who becomes a famous pastry chef, and that's kind of it. She's a great pastry chef. Anime has some peculiar obsessions, but there it is. And then let me move to this one here. Let's get to the Sentai stuff. We've got 3 from Sentai, which is distributed by Section 23, Mr. Tonegawa, the complete collection, Middle Management Blues. This is really eccentric, and it's probably funnier if you're Japanese. Very broad animation, kind of extreme artwork, and it's kind of a weird dissection of Japanese corporate culture. It seems to be a little bit cathartic in the way that they look at the ruthlessness of business culture. I would love to hear from somebody. Email us at gods@digigods.com if you're a fan of Mr. Tonegawa, if you have an idea of how this kind of dovetails with Japanese culture. Is it wrong to try and pick up girls in a dungeon? Arrow of the Orion. This is the ongoing saga of the girls in the dungeon stuff. The animation keeps getting better. The backdrops are great. The colors are amazing. The characters are really interesting. Despite the unusual title and the really kind of S&M-y suggestion there, this thing really, really does keep getting much more interesting. It's one of I wish almost that they'd change the title and make it a little bit more accessible, because it's a wonderful sort of female-oriented mystical saga. It really is kind of like a Lord of the Rings for girls. It's very interesting. Writing is improving as well. And last one from Sentai, and then just a couple others after that, is Kase-San and Morning Glories. This is really, really beautiful. Very, very artistic. They went out of their way to sort of give this a little bit extra kind of a pastel sheen or something. But it's fundamentally a story of friendship, and that's it. It's just a sweet story of friendship, and it gets a little into that Japanese fetishism about schoolgirls a little bit, but otherwise it's just beautifully animated and nicely written. The schoolgirly thing is part of the Boogiepop Phantom as well. Gosh, these titles are just so unusual. This is from Nozomi, and you can go to Nozomi ENT for NozomiEntertainment.com to find more on this. You can preview the first episode if you want to see it before you actually buy this one. This is kind of a noir detective story, and it's about Boogiepop. I don't want to tell you what Boogiepop is all about. That would kind of spoil it. But it's a girl detective thing, and it's very noirish, and it is definitely very gothic inspired. And then we continue to get really, really great anime releases from GKids. Genius Party Beyond Really, really interesting. Worth checking out. This is an anthology. They call it 12 Impacts by 12 Directors. This comes from the Studio 4 Degrees Centigrade operation, and they put both of these films on here. They are both anthologies of just great Japanese animation, Genius Party and Genius Party Beyond, which comes after it. And these are all named directors. Very, very interesting, fascinating work that they do. Wonderful in an anthology. The only thing I can think of that has even come close to sort of suggesting this kind of thing was the largely Korean animated Japanese anime spin-off thing of The Matrix, the Animatrix. If you remember that anthology.
Animatrix, yeah.
That was really interesting. So this is sort of a similar thing. Anime anthologies are always really interesting. The animators just kind of go crazy. And this is both Genius Party and Genius Party Beyond on one disc.
Groovy,
That's it for anime.
Should I do some LBGT?
Yeah, let's do it.
Let's knock out a little of that. First one from Strand releasing Carol D. Tomasio's film Mom Plus Mom. It's just a perfectly lovely little movie. Almost like a fairy tale. This movie is about these two women of a certain age who get together, and they decide pretty much right away that they want to have a baby together. But that's going to be a little bit more difficult than they thought. And it's all about the trials and tribulations they go through in attempting to have a baby while still maintaining some sort of a life together. It's really a sweet film. And it's a sort of film that sort of believes in miracles as they sort of happen in the context of this movie. From Strand releasing bonus materials include the theatrical trailer and some other trailers from Strand. Then we pop over to is it Deku?
Yeah, Deku is the company.
Do a couple of Dekus here. The first one, Mr. Leather. This is an absolutely fascinating documentary set in Brazil, and it's about this leather competition, sort of dominatrix leather competition that they have down there every year. They have these competitions. They all model and do all this kind of stuff, and the winner gets to travel around Brazil promoting the leather culture. For a whole entire year. All expenses paid, which is a pretty difficult thing to do in Brazil, where none of this stuff is particularly okay. So what this movie is really about are these people declaring to the world who they are and how they live and how they want to live, and refusing to knuckle under to the ideas that there are, the things that some cultures just simply won't allow. It's a neat little movie, 85 minutes long, Portuguese with English subtitles. The third is what this film is called here in my hands. If you look it up, though, it's going to be called Triads, which is what it was named before. I don't really know why. Anyway, it's about this couple who's been married for 4 or 5 years. Marriage is getting a little bit stale. They decide they're going to try what they call a triad relationship, bring a third person. Look, Bill and Ted and Carol and Alice? Yeah. Mm-hmm. The movie's got to be, 40 years?
Bob and Ted and Carol.
Bob and Ted and Carol. Yeah. The movie's got to be 40, 45 years old now. Yeah. They should have just watched that movie. And it'll tell you how this is going to work out, which is badly. And that's the way it does, in fact, work out. 45 days away from you, a perfectly lovely film from Raphael Gnomes. It's as much of a travelogue as anything else. A young man has a broken heart, takes out on a long trip across the world, goes to all kinds of really neat places, England, Portugal, Argentina, and meets all kinds of people in order to mend his broken heart. It's like I say, it's just a lovely travelogue of a guy who's traveling around, meeting a bunch of cute dudes and having some fun. Gotta love that. Men of Hard Skin. I think we're into the TLA releasing titles right now. Again, this is another lovely movie, but a dramatic film. A young man lives with his sister and his father, and bonus wares, and he's having this affair with a priest. And it takes him a little while to come to understand that this affair with this priest is actually incorrect, at least on the part of the priest. For one thing, the priest is the priest. For the other thing, this young man is underage. So this movie is all about how these things come to be reconciled in the mind of this young man living in this sort of bucolic area of Argentina, and then what he does when he decides to go off to the big city. It's a powerful movie, poignant and sweet, but also a little bit tougher than some of the other ones. The Blonde also. This is also TLA. The Blonde One, I should say. It's also set in the suburbs of Argentina. Young man just moved in with his colleague, actually, just a guy that he's working with. This guy that he's working with is a real player. Got men coming and going from the apartment, from his room in the apartment anyway, sort of left and right, as this young man, the blonde one, just sort of watches what's going on. Eventually, they start up a relationship together. And the sort of hypersexual stuff that you sort of expect sort of drifts away as they sort of wander into the sort of like husband wife, boyfriend girlfriend, boyfriend boyfriend sort of relationship that just involves the two of them and not anybody else. It's sort of like the reverse of that movie Triad. It's about how you go from people who are sleeping all around to people who are just involved in each other's lives, and it's really, really a tender and sweet movie that I like quite a lot. All male, all nude Johnsons. I love this movie, which is a documentary. It's a hell of a title. Which is the documentary follow-up to another documentary called All Male, All Nude. This one, it says that it's set in the second gayest city in America. How the hell they know that? I have no idea, but nevertheless, this movie is a lot of fun. It's this guy, he owns these strip clubs in various different places in America. This one's from Breaking Glass Pictures, by the way. And this one is set in this little town in Florida. And what we're doing is following these male strippers. Some of them a little bit older. The guy that owns the club is about 40 or so. He has a boyfriend who's about 20 or so. 4 or 5 other male nude dancers at this club, strippers anyway. And we follow them, and we hear their stories and their backstories and their lives. And it's really, really, really interesting. Generally speaking, they're doing that cliched thing that we always talk about with strippers. They're stripping to make money to pay for college. They actually
that happens a lot.
Yeah, like they go to school and then they hang around at night and do a little bit of stripping. And you know what? It makes a hell of a lot of sense to me. If I had abs like this, I promise you could throw money at me all night if it paid for my master's degree. Anyway, it's a really fun film. It's not particularly a little bit of nudity, a lot of all that kind of stuff, but it's neat little documentary. All male, all nude Johnsons.
I want to make a mention real quickly of this movie called Hamlet in the Golden Vale. This is a really unusual new movie, and it's one of those things where it's a little hard to sort of keep track of what's real and what's not. Basically, it's a story. It's a staging of Hamlet, but by a group of actors that go to this remote Irish castle, and you get Hamlet, but you also get the backstories of all the actors. And the way that this was shot was very, very interesting. They used a Canon camera.
Yeah.
They did a whole kind of a remote thing, so that the cameras weren't really necessarily the crew wasn't intruding on the actors, and the crew could watch what the camera was shooting remotely. It is really very interesting and very, very hard to explain. But it explains it as well as it likely can with the materials included with the disc. But if you're a fan of Hamlet, here's the bottom line: if you're a fan of Hamlet, this is worth checking out. There are a lot of different versions of Hamlet we've had over the years. There's obviously the contemporized version with Ethan Hawke. There's the Kenneth Branagh version. There's the Franco Zeffirelli version with Mel Gibson.
Yeah.
The original Laurence Olivier film, which won Best Picture back in the 1940s, 48, I think it was. And this kind of goes along to some degree with the Kenneth Branagh comedy Midwinter's Tale, which is about a staging of Hamlet by these completely incompetent actors who just make a mash of the whole thing. This is sort of like a serious version of that. And it's a nice addition to the corpus of Hamlet on film, because they all have something to say about this incredibly rich and textured piece of material that just never gets old. Shakespeare's masterpiece. It's called Hamlet in the Golden Vale. And then want to make just cover a few bases with some of the stuff we did not get to last week. I got a few left from the Kino Studio Classics line that are worth talking about. All of them classic movies, primarily from the 40s and the 1950s. I think we're not outside the 50s here. So from 1947 is It Always Rains on Sunday. This is directed by Robert Hamer. This was an Ealing Studios film, which primarily Ealing Studios was known mostly for stuff like Kind Hearts and Coronets, and Robert Hamer for directing movies like that, comedies. And this is actually a completely different kind of a film, but it's still an Ealing film, and it's still really good work from Robert Hamer. And it's very serious, and it's quite lovely. It's a beloved film in the UK, not really that beloved outside, but one of the more interesting films of the period. 1947, of course, is right at the tail, right in the a couple of years after the end of World War II, and this looks at that exact period in London's East End. It stars Googie Withers, one of the best names of any actress ever, Googie Withers.
Googie.
This is the last film that she did for Ealing, and it's about what now that the war is over, what is this housewife going to do with the rest of her life? Because literally the war has changed the world.
Yeah.
And that's the thing we often forget is that life before World War II, it was not just afterwards, hey, let's get back to the way things were. Life's changed.
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah.
And worth noting, too, that this was photographed by the amazing cinematographer Doug Slocum, who, of course, gave us Raiders of the Lost Ark. From 1949, we have The Queen of Spades, directed by Thorold Dickinson, and starring Anton Walbrook and Edith Evans. When I received this, I looked at this and I thought, I don't know who Thorold Dickinson was, and I've never heard of Anton Walbrook and Edith Evans. Who are these people, and what is this film? And then there's a little pull quote at the top that says, a uniquely haunting film, Martin Scorsese.
Yeah.
And I was like, oh, now I get it. This is one of those British films that otherwise would have completely disappeared from the earth if Martin Scorsese hadn't have told us that we need to pay attention to it. And so I do. Actually, there's a lot of credentials in this, and I realized, I do know who Anton Walbrook and Edith Evans are. I've seen them in a lot of films, just didn't know their names. And this takes place in 19th century Russia, and it is a kind of a sweeping period melodrama with Dame Edith Evans as this aging countess, and Walbrook as this Russian military man, and it goes into so many different directions you don't expect it to. It's very, very interesting, and it's beautifully made. Otto Heller does amazing cinematography in this. It really, really is wonderful. The source material is from Alexander Pushkin, the great Russian poet. It's quite an interesting discovery. A lot of interesting people involved in this too. Jack Clayton, who would eventually do Room at the Top, and the film adaptation of Ray Bradbury's
Slaughterhouse.
It was with Jonathan Pryce. This way, something wicked.
Something wicked this way comes.
Yeah, Jack Clayton did that too. George Auric does a great score for this, so it's lovely. It has a Nick Pinkerton audio commentary, introduction by Martin Scorsese, who will scold you about why you need to see this as opposed to Marvel movies, and a whole bunch of other really interesting things, including a 1951 introduction or interview with Thorold Dickinson at the British Federation of Film Societies, and an introduction that he does in 1968 at a screening. So really, really quite an interesting film. The Queen of Spades, really great British discovery. From 1950, we have 7 Days to Noon, which is another great classic British film from the period that stars Barry Jones as this eccentric professor who runs away from where he's working with an atomic bomb under his arm. And this is what he does it specifically as a way of kind of blackmailing the country into accepting peace and to no longer make any more nuclear weapons, et cetera, and so forth. Really a fascinating kind of early anti-war film from the earliest part of the atomic era, just 5 years after the end of World War II. Really, really quite interesting. Done as a comedy, kind of a little bit of a wacky comedy. It's a smart film. It's a really, really smart film, and an overlooked British classic from the period. From 1954, we have the Jerry Hopper directed and Ross Hunter produced Naked Alibi, which is a really great star vehicle. It got Sterling Hayden and Gloria Graham. My mother was nearly Sterling Hayden's nanny until my father talked her out of it. For all kinds of reasons. That's a whole separate story. Gloria Graham, just one of the great stars of the period. I love watching Gloria Graham. She would be an amazing star today if she were alive. She really would. Just fantastic. And look, it's kind of a crime film. It's sort of a pseudo noir in some respects. Anything that Sterling Hayden is in almost always turns into a noir just because he is who he is. Gloria Graham, is always going to be a femme fatale. But it's really, you're just watching this to watch them work with each other. And forget about all the guns and the crime machinations and everything else. It's just a lot of fun. And talking about great actresses, Ida Lupino, also a great filmmaker, stars with Howard Duff and Stephen McNally in Woman in Hiding. This is from 1950 as well. This is about a woman who discovers on her honeymoon that her husband might have been a murderer. And then it just gets even more complicated after that. This is a great, great noir. And Ida Lupino and Howard Duff were not yet married in this. They met in this, and then they got married, and then they made a bunch more movies together. But it's a pretty great noir. It really is. It's worth checking out. From 1950, Woman in Hiding, and then The Man Between. Is one of the most underrated noirs by Carol Reed. Carol Reed, who of course did The Third Man and would go on to step outside of his usual genre to do Oliver, for which he won an Academy Award. Carol Reed produced and directed this in 1953. It stars a terrific James Mason, along with Claire Bloom and Jeffrey Toone and some other wonderful supporting actors. It's again, nothing is really as good as The Third Man, but James Mason is really, really great. This is a Cold War thriller with James Mason stuck in the post-wall Berlin. We just had the anniversary of the Berlin Wall coming down. This is now Berlin divided, beginning of the Cold War. And it's all about what is happening in that city as a result of this division. It's very, very sharp. It takes that condition, it takes the situation, the city, and it uses it uses the Cold War crisis as a great noir backdrop. And James Mason is absolutely superb. Hildegard Neff also in this, great German actress. And that's it. That's it for the Kino stuff. Let's do some foreign.
Knock off a couple of Cohen at the top here, including this lovely Guillaume Canet film with Melanie Laurent, My Son. It's a movie about this guy.
That was just at Colcoa.
Yeah. It's a very powerful movie, a haunting movie. A couple, he's traveling all the time. They have this son. He gets a phone call from the wife. Their 7-year-old son has gone missing. So and it's all about what extents that he will go to try and find out what happened to his son, and it's all about his regret of his neglect of both his son and his wife over that period of time, and how he doesn't really know either one of them. Special features including the making of, a sort of behind the scenes with the director Christian Clairon, I think, is that how you say his name? Clarion,
Carrion.
And Guillaume Canet. Very, very good French thriller that is much older, but still an absolutely extraordinarily wonderful film, the 1982 film, The Return of Martin Guerre. This is just such a wonderful movie.
So much better than the Richard Gere thing.
Oh my goodness!
Jodie Foster.
Yeah, what are you gonna do?
Yeah. This is it. This is the original.
Natalie by Gerard Depardieu. What's one? When we meet them, they're this young couple who are just getting married. They have some issues. He goes away, ostensibly off to the war, but he really just sort of disappears. Some 10, 15 years later, I don't know how much time elapsed. This man returns who claims to be Martin. and wants to take up with his wife Natalie again. But then again, there are issues, and then it turns into sort of a courtroom drama, and we have to figure out whether or not this is in fact Martin or not. He's so wonderful in this movie. Gerard and Natalie by two, but he has scenes in this movie with his face where there's nothing but his face that he uses to convey everything that needs to be conveyed. It's just beautiful. This is an all-new 4K restoration. It's really, really beautiful from the folks over at Cohen Media, with all kinds of wonderful features, including a discussion with Natalie on this film, which by itself makes the whole damn thing worth it as far as I'm concerned. Another wonderful, more contemporary French film, At War, from Stéphane Brisé.
Stéphane Brisé.
Stéphane
Brisé, who's a nice guy, really nice guy.
And in this film, which is in some ways a sequel to his film A Measure of the Man. Which was about this
which won the Cannes Best Actor for Vincent Lindon.
About 2015, a couple of years ago.
Yeah.
And this in some ways is a sequel to that, not an actual sequel to that, but they're both about these blue collar workers and what's happening in the sort of blue collar factory environment of France, which is, if you followed that yellow vest movement a good chunk of last year, speaking to some of these things. This particular one, a German company, has made all sorts of promises to these factory workers, 1,100 factory workers, promised them their jobs and how their jobs would not be done away with after this German company took over the firm. The German company takes over the firm, and what do they want to do? They want to do away with all these people. The union gathers together in order to sort of force a change, but there's this infighting within the union as well. This is a very, very, very powerful movie. This reminds me of Martin Ritt, sort of Norma Ray in a contemporary sort of sense. And Stefan is sort of HUD, sort of wanders around this territory quite a lot. And Vincent is just wonderful as a sort of everyman. He has that everyman face. Vincent is so not an everyman. Hasn't been an everyman his entire life. But that face says
that
so.
Is,
and that's
but
what
Spencer
you need.
Tracy too. Spencer Tracy had that everyman face.
Yeah. Wonderful stuff.
Yeah.
You got a few?
Yeah, let's do a few other catalog library titles. So this is a really interesting little indie from 2009 that has sort of held on. This thing was very sparsely distributed. This is the 10th anniversary edition. It is a Blu-ray from IndiePix. Now, IndiePix does not release Blu-rays. IndiePix releases DVD-Rs to DVD, and they have a channel on Amazon Prime. So, this is a thing. This has become kind of a cult film in a really weird way. From 2009, Yesterday Was a Lie. Really super low budget, but very moody actors piece. That crosses all kinds of genres. It's a little bit pretentious. It's basically a noir. It's got these femme fatales in it. It's got a lounge singer, and it goes into a very it's like a noir that veers into science fiction at a certain point when all the twists start coming. But it's still really, really ambitious, and it's eccentric, and it's really interesting. And it's very, very telling that IndiePix would say, you know what, this is done so well for us, and it still kind of hangs around. It's such an odd film, but such a compelling film. It's worth putting out on Blu-ray. So they did a Blu-ray, and there it is. Yesterday Was a Lie. It's worth checking out. What is not worth checking out is The Thing. No, not the John Carpenter film. The 2010 film that is effectively, I can't believe it's been 9 years since this thing already.
Really? Yeah. Man. I remember hating on that just yesterday.
This is not good. Effectively, this is a prequel to the John Carpenter film, but it's kind of like a sequel. It knows that the John Carpenter film came out, so it's trafficking in that by repeating a lot of it, but it's narratively actually right before it, and it literally connects. They have a little thing at the end. This didn't give anything away, but a little thing at the end where if you know the Carpenter film, you go, "Oh, isn't that cute?" We literally go right to the moment that starts the John Carpenter film. Whatever. This is not very good. Mary Elizabeth Winstead is a wonderful actress. She deserves a better movie. Joel Edgerton, fine actor, deserves a better movie. Everybody in this.
They've all had better movies since 2009, actually.
They have. They have. They've all had better stuff. I mean, look, if you really really want to nerd out, I guess the fact that it connects to the John Carpenter film is probably worth something, but otherwise it's not really worth checking out. And it's on Blu-ray. We also have finally on Blu-ray The Hours and Times by Christopher Munch from Oscilloscope. This is on Blue. And this is a very short feature. It's 58 minutes long. It's basically a low-budget black and white glorified overlong student film, the first film ever made by Christopher Munch, which speculates that in April of 1963, when John Lennon and Brian Epstein, the Beatles' manager, went to Barcelona for a weekend, that things happened and that there was some kind of a homosexual liaison between them that has gone unspoken and unacknowledged except in rumor and whatnot. I mean, it's an interesting what if. It was developed with very very little money at the time. There's a lot of interesting stuff on here that makes it worth the fact that it's only an hour long. There's an interview with Christopher Munch. There's a commentary with David Angus and Ian Hart from 2007. There's a Q&A that was at the Billy Wilder Theater at UCLA in 2012. A short film by Christopher Munch, Conversation with a Cigarette, which was a short film from 2014 with Ian Hart. Here's the only thing that's interesting. Ian Hart, who plays John Lennon in this, based on playing John Lennon in this, was then cast as John Lennon in the film Backbeat.
Mm-hmm.
That is the thing that's interesting, is that he played it so well in a short film that they said, how about doing it again in a feature?
Yeah.
And he said, okay.
Yeah.
And I remember interviewing him at the time, and he was he was grateful for it. He just said, I couldn't believe it. He goes, because look at me. I don't look anything like John Lennon. I look nothing like John Lennon. I played him twice. So that tells you something. So it's an interesting curiosity. And then a couple from Twilight Time. We love the people at Twilight Time. So sad they lost one of their principals recently. Nick Redman left us. But The Tall Men and Whirlpool. The Tall Men finds an aging Clark Gable pairing up with a dapper Robert Ryan and a gorgeous Jane Russell in one of his last kind of real meaty pieces. This is from 1955. He's definitely on the downward slide, but you know what? It's a solid Western. It's beautifully made. Raoul Walsh directed it, does a really, really good job. And it's essentially about these ex-Confederates who hook up with this kind of skeezy opportunist played by Ryan to do a cattle drive. And they're supposed to go from Texas to Montana. And as happens in all these movies with cattle drives, we've talked about a lot of them, Jane Russell shows up, and everything goes off the track. Mainly the reason for getting this is that Victor Young has an amazing score that you can listen to on an isolated score track, and it's absolutely wonderful. And then Whirlpool, which also has an isolated score track, although not as dazzling as the Victor Young one. But Whirlpool is a really interesting movie produced and directed by Otto Preminger, who was doing a lot of his best work right around this period, 1949. Preminger is pushing all the buttons that we're accustomed to him pushing, and he's doing it with an amazing cast that includes the just stunning Gene Tierney, Richard Conte, Jose Ferrer, never looking more dapper, Charles Bickford. This is a really, really good cast, a really, really interesting film that is kind of, it's a noir, but it's an elegant noir. It's not down and dirty. It's not something that takes place in back alleys with with grime and dinge. This is kind of a high society noir. And Gene Tierney is a socialite who's caught shoplifting, and Jose Ferrer is the astrologer who has this scheme to use her as his she's kind of going to do. She's going to be the subject of his frame up for the evil things that he has in mind. It's a really, really cool story. It's very well done. Ben Hecht wrote it, and as you would expect, it's just beautifully, beautifully written. And the isolated score is by David Raskin, of course, famous for his music for Laura. Not the same iconic score here, but a very nice isolated track as well.
Couple of these?
Yeah, let's do it.
All right, guys, take a little international journey here. Start with The Wild Pear Tree, which is a Turkish film. A lovely film, a little bit on the devastating side, if you don't mind that kind of thing. So basically what we have here is this young writer who returns to his hometown after graduating from college, a small hometown, where he's going to try to find a sponsor to help him to pay for the publishing of his first book that he's writing at that time, while at the same time dealing with his father, who is a gambling addict, among other things. It's a truly beautiful film, a devastating film. What it's about is how this young man uses these experiences and reflections on his childhood, who his father is now and who his father used to be, to inform the book that he is ultimately going to write as he tries to raise money to actually write that book. So it's a really, really beautiful film. 2-disc set. Special features on both discs, including on disc 1, a Q&A with the director, and on disc 2, a making of The Wild Pear. Some fairly long documentaries about the 126 minutes. It's a lot. The material, the special feature material, is much longer than the actual film. Put it that way. But it's a lovely, ruminative film that one should definitely check out if one can. Then I have this Indian film. How do you say that, Wade?
Mehsampur, I guess.
Mehsampur.
Yeah.
Mehsampur. Good enough.
Like I speak Hindi.
Well, I knew you'd get a little bit closer than I would. Anyway, this is a really interesting but slightly wacky film about this filmmaker, this musician, and this actress who take this road trip to a particular place. So many years ago in 1988, a fairly famous sort of folk group was murdered.
Huh.
For all kinds of political controversy in this particular place in India.
Is this an actual thing?
That part of it is an actual thing.
Wow.
This is the film is a film, but that little bit is true. In the context of this film, this filmmaker, director, finds this old drummer who had been a drummer in the band of those two people, and an actress, and he wants to make a movie about what happened. And he talks the actress and the old drummer into riding with him to the location of where this horrible, tragic murder actually happened. And so we're on this road trip. There's all kinds of sexual innuendo things that go on and whatnot. All kinds of politics come into it. But this guy is sort of making this movie about these events as they go along. It's really an interesting film, and it won the Grand Jury Prize at the Mumbai Film Festival.
Wow!
For a couple of different in a couple of different categories. Nevertheless, it's a powerful movie, very interesting about this historical event, sort of taken and turned into this sort of narrative story. That's from India. Octav is a Romanian film. I have a push-pull relationship with Romanian films. You never know what you're gonna
So
get.
true.
This one is a bit of magical realism that worked for me anyway. In this film, an elderly man who's been gone for decades and decades returns to his family and to sort of re-engage as he moves toward the end of his life. He starts seeing a ghost, the ghost of a childhood sweetheart, and seeing this ghost starts to make things that happened in his childhood change. The events of his childhood start to change, which of course means that the events of his present are changing as well. And it causes him to be reflective about things that he did or didn't do in his life as he was going along, and to look at this sort of possible second chance there. It's a fairly lovely film. I mean, it's a film about literally what the tagline says: we must cherish every moment. Lovely film there. A couple more?
Yeah, do a couple more, and then
Thoroughly
I'll
love
hit the
this
cult
one,
stuff.
The Chambermaid, and I have to remember this the next time I'm dabbling around on our list of movies over there. The Chambermaid was a lovely film by Leila Avilés, and it's about a chambermaid in a very exclusive, high-end hotel in Mexico City. Her and some of her colleagues. But what's wonderful about this film, not unlike Roma from last year, what we mostly do is hang out with this chambermaid in something approaching real time as she wanders about this hotel taking care of these people who are kind of sometimes oblivious to her as a human being, or who are sometimes patronizing to her as a human being. But what we're doing is we're watching them from her perspective as opposed to watching her from their perspective. We get to see who these people are, the way they behave, the things that they say and do. And it's an absolutely it's just a really really wonderful movie that we work outside of that space a little bit, but for the most part that's what we're doing. So anyway, a wonderful little movie that I hope that folks will remember as we move into award season. You want to take it, sir?
Yeah, gotta do some cult movies here. This stuff is all completely bonkers. If you like cult movies, you're going to love all this stuff. I don't particularly love all this stuff, but cult movie people will love all this stuff. It's just all off the wall and completely insane. Relatively recent is 2012's Undertaker by Naoyoshi Kawamatsu. It is all of 65 minutes long, and that's already too long. Look, it's a flesh-eating Japanese zombie movie, and there's really not much more to it. It's kind of got a plot to it. The guy who's the Undertaker, he kills you hire him to kill your family members who've turned into zombies. There's really nothing more to it. It kind of has, I think, some sort of dystopian tones to it, but really there's not much else to it. It's a zombie movie. It's a Japanese zombie movie, Undertaker. It's gruesome and gory, and you'll probably have a lot of fun if you like that sort of thing. That's from Synapse, and then also from Synapse is "Watch Me When I Kill," which has this is another one of my favorite taglines. It's the special edition. Was there another edition? "Watch Me When I Kill." This is my favorite tagline ever. When I go berserk, you're better off dead. It's completely nuts. This is from 1977. Way too late for a movie like this. Yeah, it's just nuts. It's about a nightclub dancer who's being stalked by a serial killer. It's completely crazy. It's got an audio commentary on it, a bunch of trailers, and 3 short films from the director Antonio Bito, which are not worth watching. It's from 1977. It's just a riot. It's a hoot. Don't bother if you don't love movies like that. From Mondo Macabro, who also do a lot of great stuff, a Spanish horror film, The Killer of Dolls. Wow. There it is, 1974, directed by Michael Scaife, which is probably a pseudonym for something else.
Yeah.
They all were, so you just don't pay attention to a Spanish name. They make up an American-sounding name or an English-sounding name. This has extras on it as well. The lead actor, David Roca, does an interview, and there's a couple of commentaries, one of them by Kat Ellinger, who's doing a ton of these days. But really, basically, this is about a guy who is thrown out of medical school because he just can't handle the blood. So anyway, he goes back to a city in France where I used to live near Montpellier, and tries to figure out what to do with the rest of his life. And that's where we find out why it is that he has an issue with blood.
No.
And it has to do with his sister and dolls, and him doing operations on the dolls, and everything was, now it gets weird, and then and then it goes completely off the rails and goes into a weirder area. It's okay. Woman Chasing the Butterfly of Death by Kim Ki-young. This is so bizarre. I don't even know where to go with this. This is a South Korean horror film, exploitation film from 1978. See Parasite instead. It's more sophisticated, and it kind of fires on all cylinders. But I guess you could possibly argue that without Kim Ki-young laying the groundwork, you wouldn't have something like Parasite. But this is not a terribly well done film. It's a little bit silly, and the gory aspect of it is not all that convincing. But nonetheless, I guess it has some kind of transcendent meaning if you're a historian of Korean films. And let's see, 3 here from Severin. I'll go through these really, really quickly. Paganini Horror by Luigi Cozzi. This is a Donald Pleasance shows up to bring a slight bit of credibility to an otherwise really, really silly 1988 late giallo film that's not very Dario Argento. This was, Luigi Cozzi, who did this, did most famously a movie that I saw in the wake of Star Wars called Star Crash, which was a terrible film at the time, but it was, I went and saw it in the theater. I remember it very well. Not a very good director, but it's about an all-girl rock band and something about a guy who sold his soul to the devil, and none of it makes very much sense, but it's gory and it tries to be scary, and at times I guess it maybe is. This is a classic, and this one I've got to recommend because it's such an absolute hoot. From 1961, the epic black and white cult film Werewolf in a Girl's Dormitory. This thing has been slashed to ribbons so many times. This is the original uncut version, all 85 minutes of it, and what an absolute hoot it is. They have a great interview with Ernesto Gastaldi, who wrote it, and a really great audio commentary with Kurt Lowens, and who's the actor in it, and David Del Valle, which they recorded for Retro Media. The alternate opening, not really worth paying attention to, but I'll tell you, it is an absolutely riotous film. It's not scary in any way whatsoever, but it's just freaking funny because it's a werewolf in a girl's dormitory. How do you not laugh at that? And then also from Senran is Byleth, the demon of incest. I will say it again, Byleth, the demon of incest. So Mark Damon, who produced a lot of garbage, and I think still does, produced this in 1972, or else acquired it. This is also an Italian film. And it's from 1972, absolutely ridiculously stupid, but it's funny. And I think there's something you can say about that. It's got a lot of the giallo stuff at the time, but it just isn't very scary. It's just silly now in hindsight. But yeah, it's basically about a guy who's obsessed with his own sister and wants to get it on. He's an evil count or some such thing. And then the last couple here are the 3D Nudie-Cuties collection. We're going to be talking at some point in the future about our reissue on Blu-ray of Schlock, The Secret History of American Movies, which Ray has just finished remastering. We talk a lot about Nudie-Cuties in it as one of the early stage subgenres of the exploitation movement. The 3D Film Archive has gone ahead and restored a couple of early features from the era, the Nudie-Cutie era, plus some bonus shorts. The two films are The Bellboy and the Playgirls and Adam and Six Eves. Presumably, although I would want to confirm this, but they are marketing it this way, but I would really want to confirm it. Presumably, the 3D footage in The Bellboy and the Playgirls was directed by a 22-year-old UCLA Film School grad named Francis Coppola. So, but we would obviously want to do a little more research to make sure. I do know that he worked in this genre, but anyway, that would certainly be interesting and historically noteworthy. Otherwise, they're basically Nudie-Cuties. There's just titillation from the era, but archivally, it's of great value. And then lastly, this is absolutely terrific. Scorpio Films gives us the Dutch Sex Wave collection. Cult Epics has released this. And it is these films were a significant impact at the time. They have now put them all on one collection. We've talked about some of them on the show before. Frank and Ava, Blue Movie, Susan, Sandra, Olga, and Julie, and Obsessions. They are now all here in one complete set from the late 60s into the mid-70s. And very, very influential, even if the filmmakers never went on to do much else. This is, there was a moment where these films in the Netherlands had some currency around the world. Yeah. So the Dutch Sex Wave collection, 4-disc Blu-ray set, collector's edition from Cult Epics with Frank and Ava, Blue Movie, Susan, Sandra, Olga, and Julie, and Obsessions.
Knock off a few more over here.
Yeah.
An Israeli film, loosely, this is a drama, but it's loosely based on history. 1947, young female actress in northern Israel. This is before Israeli nationhood, of course. Is traveling the north of Israel. She's going to be an actress. She goes to this kibbutz where she meets this young man, 24-year-old Eli Ben Ziev. And she falls in love with him and begins the process of, sort of trying to seduce him and get him to fall in love with her. Problem is he has a girlfriend, and he's a real kibbutznik. this guy, and she's more of a contemporary type, but nevertheless, and it's all about how that relationship builds, and they eventually fall in love and decide to get married right as Israel 1947, obviously 1947 war is about to happen. What's interesting about this is that it's loosely based on the true story of Israel's second prime minister's son. Eli Ben-Ziev was Israel's second prime minister's son, and how he fell in love with this girl from the city, and what it meant to him and Israel and his family and all that kind of stuff. So it's kind of a sweet sort of thing. An Israeli love story is the name of the movie. It's based on a true
lot of
story.
Israeli movies in the mix lately.
Yeah,
it's fascinating.
Quite a lot.
Yeah,
actually, including this one, Harmonia. Which is a film about a harpist in the Jerusalem Philharmonic. She's married to the conductor of the orchestra, and they don't have any children, and their relationship is a little bit aloof. Another performer comes into the orchestra, and these two women have this sort of attraction to each other. Hagar is her name. In any case, Hagar finds out that the couple, that her friend and her husband would like to have a baby. She decides that I will surrogate a baby for you, and in fact does. Surrogates a baby for them, gives them the baby that she surrogates for them, and then leaves the orchestra and leaves the city, thus leaving them with the child that she decided to have for them. 12 years go by. And this child grows up to be quite a virtuoso pianist and a bit of a rebel, always fighting with his mother, at least the woman whom he believes to be his mother. Around that time, now 40-odd years old, Sarah, who we first met at the beginning of this film, gets pregnant herself and has another baby. Another 3 years goes by, and Hagar, the woman whom we first met at the beginning of the movie, some 15 years ago now, returns to the orchestra. Now we have this young man who has no idea that the second woman is his mother, and we have this 3-year-old with his brother, and this whole relationship, and it's actually quite interesting to see how all of this sort of plays its way out. Harmonia is the name of the film, an Israeli film, and man, they make some interesting stuff. They
do. Well, it's an interesting part of the world.
For sure. One more here.
Yeah,
another Israeli film. Another Israeli film from Strand Releasing, The Other Story. This one's a more straightforward film. You have these two young women. Both of them are having the exact opposite crises in their life. One of them has been in a very sheltered Hasidic family, and she would like to get out from under the yoke of all of that. And the other one, who's been living a fairly decadent life in the city, would like to organize her life and is going back into a religious sort of culture. They meet each other, and they're sort of pushing and pulling against one another in terms of what they want to do. And it's really a fascinating story about how these young women who've both experienced the exact opposite of each other's lives are now looking to experience each other's lives, but it will probably tear them apart again just as they're coming together. A lovely, lovely movie. The Other Story from Strand Releasing.
A couple more here real quickly. Intimacy by the late Patrice Chéreau, the wonderful director of The Queen Margot. This film won the Golden Bear at the Berlin Film Festival, and very deservedly. It's one of the more powerful films that deals with sex and relationships and all of the things that can go wrong when people make bad choices. This is from 2001. It stars Carrie Fox and Mark Rylance, as well as Timothy Spall. But it is basically it deals with the relationship between Mark Rylance and Carrie Fox, who are a couple that are just having these weekly hookups, and then how everything just turns into an emotional wasteland in the wake of that. Adapted from the novel by Hanif Kureishi and some of his other work, it is really, really an incredibly powerful film, beautifully made. And Carrie Fox also very deservedly won Best Actress at that same Berlin Film Festival. And then lastly, Buñuel in the Labyrinth of the Turtles is an unusual animated film that I didn't particularly care for, to be honest. But it is the story. So Buñuel made after he made his first film, L'Âge d'Or, which was not successful. He decided to go out and do something more raw, more rugged. So he went to this remote area in Spain and decided to just sort of make a documentary about the way these people live, the dying of their culture. And what's particularly interesting about this is that it interweaves actual footage with the animation, actual footage from the film that he made from it, which is a very legendary documentary known as Las Hordas Tierra Sin Pan, the soil. I forget. I don't know how exactly you would. Anyway, forget the translation, but Las Hordas is the film. And it was financed by a buddy of his who won the lottery and used his lottery winnings to say, "Hey, Luis, let's make a movie." And so Buñuel is not yet Buñuel here. He's still, scraping by, and they're living with these people, and they're barely able to afford their film. And they decided to tell the story of the making of that film in animation. A little bit weird. So I appreciate the making of dramatization. It's a little odd to see it in animation.
What's the nature of that animation? What does it look like? I mean,
it's kind of raw, but it looks like what's in Las Hordas. When you see Las Hordas, the faces of the people, you go, "Oh, there's that guy." Like they do try to give it. It's European animation. It's a little bit. I mean, it's not nearly on the level of Triplets of Belleville, but it kind of leans into that a little bit. Stylized, but maybe. I mean, it's what? I guess there's a touch of Buñuel in the animation.
Yeah.
So anyway, Buñuel and Labyrinth of the Turtles. Not necessarily my kind of thing, but a very interesting concept for an animated film nonetheless. All right, that's it. Next week, our holiday show. Tune in. We're going to give you a good time and have a ton of giveaways. You have no idea. Some of the stuff that's been given us is fantastic. So it's really good. All right, everybody. Have a great week. We'll see you next week.